Welcome to our first lecture in Module 2 of the Darshan project. And we're going to start off this module by looking at the various constructs of time within the Vedic system. This whole section is about cycles, so we're going to kind of get a bird's eye view of some of the bigger structures at play through a Jyotish lens, and go from there. And so most of us rarely consider the construct of time itself very deeply. However, it forms a really fundamental part of how we interact and how we perceive the world. And it's one of those necessary reflections we really have to take in order to really see its importance, because we take it for granted so much. As well as how it informs our relationship to creation. And so in this video, we're going to be looking at various concepts of time, and this is going to include both the linear and cyclical models of time, which most people should be somewhat familiar with, but we'll just look into it briefly to understand the differences and overlaps between the Vedic systems and Western systems. We'll also look more specifically at the Vedic system and how there's various levels of time, from empirical all the way to transcendental time and beyond even, which has very significant ramifications for when we look at timing systems and how to approach time and understanding things like the Yugas, which we'll also look at a little more in depth than what most people are used to. And we'll look at the theory of the Yugas, and also a little side note into Sri Yukteswar's calculations, Yogananda's guru, who had some different calculations for the Kali Yuga, which are very, very prevalent these days. And a lot of people often reference him, stating that we're not in the Kali Yuga. And we'll look at those ideas versus the more traditional concepts of Kali Yuga dating and timing system. And then finally, we'll look at smaller subdivisions of the yugas that can be used for understanding more specific shifts in time, such as dynasties or nations, or even we go down to shifts in humanity to 10 or even 1 years, to see more global shifts and understanding different epochs within the movement of those larger yuga theories. So all of these are really important to understand, because they give us a broader perspective of where our lives are placed, and what's possible within existence, within the universe, and give us a framework to how to approach these subjects. So it's a really important thing, and we're starting big to place before we start to place ourselves within smaller kind of daily cycles, just to give some appreciation and perspective for where we really are these days, according to the teachings I've had and what I'm sharing here. So the first general look we look at is circular and linear time. And so you can see in this simple little diagram here, you can see that, from left to right, those lines represent that basic trajectory of linear time, with a starting point, with an ending point, as it moves forward. And this is largely the view held by modern sciences, with something that has a past, a present, and a future. These 3 points, and also many religions, such as Christianity, and Western, more Western kind of minded religions, often hold this concept of time. I'm not familiar with a lot of the esoterics of some of the Western spirituality. So they may get into cyclical time, but as far as the basic exoteric versions is what I'm aware of. So I'm not sure if anybody has some correction on that. Please let me know. But I'm largely, most people nowadays have this linear view of time that informs their life and beyond. And so in this view, things are often thought to have started, at some unknown point in time and continue to evolve up until the present. And it's thought that it'll continue to evolve into the future. Now, implicit in this view is the idea that we're constantly evolving, and often for a better or some type of higher purpose, and there often seems to be no limit to this evolution. So, whatever was old and came before is often seen as something more primitive or an earlier time, and there's not a lot of respect often for the depth of what came before, or even the possibility that for example on this earth maybe there were other civilizations or whole epochs that vanished that we know nothing about, which a lot of New Age theories get into that I don't ascribe to or look into too much, but there within cyclical time there's definitely a possibility there, considering how old things are on this earth. But in this Western linear model, that's just it's often seen as being quackpot theories and ideas, and certain arrogance, I believe, that comes there with not being open to even that possibility. Within this linear model of time, there's often lack of repetition within the time scale, and there's the problem arises within this solely using this mode of theory. It has its uses, which we'll get into, but a problem arises as to what came first. If you think about the question, for example, of the chicken or the egg. So within the linear model of time, if everything comes back to a certain point in time, you kind of have to decide which came first, either the chicken or the egg. And obviously there's no logical conclusion to that. However, when we look at the circular models of time, something evolved from this beginning point, and it continues to evolve, and then it goes back to that source. So no matter which way you go in the circular motion, either you go backwards enough or you go forwards enough, everything's going to kind of go back to that original source of creation, which is implicit. We've seen this in the Sankhya philosophy, where there's that root source of Mula Prakriti, which just transmutes and transforms into different things, and which everything resolves back to. So no matter which way you move in the circular motion, we're always returning back to the source, essentially. However, in that linear time, we're starting from some source and moving into some unknown, unsure future, which is kind of scary if you take it to its logical end, which a lot of scientists like to speculate on, and thinking the universe will come to some kind of standstill where there's just space and all particles disperse into infinity, and that's it. So a lot there to unpack. I hope you follow that thinking, but those are the basic issues we're looking at. Now, within the idea of cyclical time is where the patterns are repeated, and you can see this in the circles drawing in this simple diagram. Now, despite these circular ages here, this is this diagram is just a representative. I think this is from some theosophical literature, so I don't necessarily hold to the calculations or what's going on here. But you can see this age of Aries, Pisces. So these are all secular ideas we see as shown up in the zodiac. But even though there are patterns being repeated in circular forms, there's still a forward trajectory within a linear pattern. So this ancient Vedic time encompasses both ideas of both cyclical and pattern bases, as well as this forward linear trajectory. However, there's really not necessarily a straight upward path of evolution, but really it's more like a continuous breathing in and breathing out of the universe, much like our breath, and it's just reflected everywhere around us in nature, like in the seasons. We can see how things evolve and devolve over time. And much as the seasons, while they often do take obvious cyclical patterns in nature, there is a lot of variation as well. And over time, we'll see these seasonal shifts occur as well, based on other cyclical patterns, such as, the rotation of the Earth, the sun, the planets, and, more localized factors that will give a more organic, shifting nature. So that even though the patterns that are played, no one moment in time is quite ever the same. And it's no wonder that, especially nowadays, now that we're so stuck in this kind of artificial and technological past, present, future, this linear time, that we've really lost touch with these deeper patterns of time and these deeper ideas of time's patterning our existence. It's also interesting to note that ancient Vedic cosmogony has taught that during the Sat Yuga, that original kind of most spiritual yuga, there was actually only one season, spring, at all times of the years, and that as the yugas descended, seasonal variations became increasingly complex until nowadays we have the 6 seasons as we know today. And it's still thought we're still transitioning, into this seasonal thing where it's really apparent in India, but we'll look at those shifts later on in this unit. But this all plays into it, that ever shifting patterns coming and going. Now, the traditional Vedic concepts, as well as most Asian cultures, once again, just to reiterate, had both these concepts of the cyclical and the linear elements, making it a fairly complex theory. And this once again, this is a chart just for illustrative purposes, to give you some ideas. I don't prescribe to, don't try to read into what's going on here. But within the cyclical model, we see, once again, various patterns playing out over and over again, such as the movements of the planets here, and, all that they represent, all those different things we got into within our astrology unit, as well as larger movements of the solar system around the center of the galaxy is another larger kind of orbit that has certain meanings, as well as the galaxy orbiting around its own center. And, if you really look into planetary movements, everything is moving. Nothing is ever static. However, all these various patterns move together in a cycle, which creates a linear trajectory that is never quite the same as came before it. So there's these infinite permutations due to all these various cyclical patterns arising out of each moment, making each truly a unique manifestation, while being couched in circular hands. And you can think about this a lot like the various gears of a clock and how they work together to give an ever-advancing time. And so as such, we can see that as this wheel spins, it creates this forward linear motion, or what is really the illusion of a forward linear motion, if you will. Because that linear motion is only half the truth. It doesn't speak to what's pushing it forward. You can see this in how, as we walk on Earth, it would appear that we're really walking in a straight line. In your day-to-day existence, this is, that most readily calculable time is that straight linear time as you walk, from whatever, your car around your house, It seems like you're moving straight. But the more you're able to back away from the Earth, you can see that it's really a sphere, that we're walking in this sphere, in this circular way. And, you can back out to see that movement of the solar system, the movements of the Milky Ways, and all these larger and larger patterns of what are spherical nature. Now, the ancients had this larger perspective, and it's something we could all learn from and really come to appreciate within our life. And in fact, the Vedic system, they have time frames that reach, from minuscule proportions all the way to trillions of years. A lot of these time measurements were called fanciful by Western scientists as late as 1600s even. Even Western scientists couldn't even fathom what the Vedic system. But nowadays with modern physics, they're finally coming to appreciate and even get a grasp on what was there in this ancient knowledge. And once again begs that question of, which civilization and viewpoint is really more advanced, and and why has a lot of this information been grounded down, been left to times, and been thrown out of use and not respected as much, which we'll look into when we look into the Kali Yuga. And so it's really the job, especially of a Jyotishi, to be able to read that quality of time, essentially as it plays out over a person's life or in larger patterns. It's looking at these various patterns and being able to get a sense of what qualities, what things are manifesting in a person's life from those different angles. And this is likewise, we see this with the Ayurvedic specialists as well. This is looking at the qualities playing out in the physical body and how it shifts over time as well. There are a lot of patterns Ayurveda looks at to see how disease manifests and how it comes about to create lots of different permutations of disease, often tracing these changes back into patterns and cycles of the seasons, the doshas, the shrotas, lifestyle habits, and this and that. So this is very unlike Western medicine that sees a present problem, something that's there right now in the present that's manifested. They may look at some causative factors. They're really just looking at that specific modality right in the present and try to attack it with specific protocols to remove, to make sure it isn't happening in the future. They rarely go back through all those various patterns and various levels of disease that actually created the manifestation of the issue. And so it's a different way of looking, and something that the Western science really needs to appreciate and come to look at a little deeper, I believe, to integrate a little better. Now, the yogi really looks to go beyond any of these qualities, any of these patterns. However, yoga practitioner still has to pass through them, still has to understand the fundamental forces as well as the habitual and hence cyclical movements found in our thoughts, in our psychology and in how we live our life, that gets us stuck, in certain vrittis and certain movements of the mind, and free them from the concepts. Eventually, the yogis do to use larger patterns such as sattva, rajas, and tamas, which really make up all creation. And it's these gunas that the yogi, these really largest aspects of creation, that the yogi is really looking to go beyond. A lot of us aren't going to that depth, but that's really the larger patterns that the deeper yoga practitioner is trying to work with. Now, within Jyotish, which is what's going to be one of our main focuses in this lecture, we can see that it's really the sun that is the giver of natural order. It's really the creator of all, manifestation. It's literally created the planets, as we talked about before, and all the resources in the solar system. And not only do all the planets revolve around the sun, but from our vantage point, when we look at how the planets move within their transits, the sun also gives the steadiest rhythm. It moves almost exactly 1 degree per day, with very little fluctuation, unlike the other planets that are moving, in all sorts of manners. And so it's that sun, that giver of Rita, the rhythm, which is also tied in with that giver of Dharma, the path, the movement, tied in with the Ram. There's all these different levels that is there in the Vedic cosmogony. It's the giver of seasons as well, so it ties in with the Ayurveda, and that giver is life as we know it. And so in one way, we can view time at this level as much as like a wheel, where we're spinning forward at this wheel, and at the center of the axle is time itself, as represented by the sun here, and that sun is not changing. It's that steady, that dharmic pulse of the universe, but everything else around it's shown through the manifestation in the zodiac and the nakshatra mandala. Everything else changes and moves around it, just like the planets are moving and changing around it. And then when we look to go to our yoga, the more that yoga is really trying to essentially bring us to that concentrated one singular point, which is really trying to bring us towards a central point, which can be shown as that center of the sun, as that dharmic center of the sun, where we learn our one-pointed concentration. And the more we can really get to that center, to that one point, the more you can transcend, the physical world, the ups and downs of physical creation, and really open up into more subtle spheres beyond, illusion, beyond Maya, beyond all these things that are really jacking us around, so to speak. And so it's no wonder, that in Jyotish, the sun is associated with the soul. And that's really the goal of yoga as well, is to reach the soul, to move the soul. So we see that there's not so much difference between these overlinking sciences, but that they can work on very different levels and show us, different aspects of nature, but on, depending if you take it from a physical level or a subtle level or a philosophical level, they're all still working together if we know how to look at them properly. Now, past these basic levels of time, we can look to three more basic levels, basic demarcations that we can make and recognize to help us understand how time is working. At the most fundamental level, there is empirical units of time, that we can actually measure, which is largely in the physical world, as known through, clock time and your day-to-day notion of time. The next one we can look at is what are subtle units of time, which create the building blocks of reality, such as the elements existing in Mula Prakriti. And then after that, we can see to exist the transcendent time. And this is a time which is really beyond the elements and beyond manifestation. And then beyond that, even, we see that there's the supreme divinity, which can be represented as Narayana, which is beyond all time, which, you can't even conceive of that place. There's no reference for it whatsoever. So this can be seen also in the practical states of waking, of dreaming, of dreamless sleep, and that beyond state Turiya, which is seen in the ancient texts such as the Mandukya Upanishad, which we briefly looked at and mentioned when I got into the recitation of Om in the module 1. So those ideas are coming up here again, but we see that they can really inform our concepts of time as well, and gives us a little deeper nuance there. Now, these are just rough demarcations of these levels of time, but gives you an appreciation for how each level, at each level, there exists a different concept and a different approach to space and time. For example, a lot of New Age spiritual people will often reference concepts such as, living in the eternal now, or how, we are all one consciousness. And this is true at a very high level. Definitely what they're saying is true. However, most of us, including, most New Age types, are extremely engrossed in the physical, empirical time. And, while stating such things may be true, they're only one part of a very complicated equation to really mature spiritually. Now, furthermore, we must also be able to transit between, these various levels of being, these various levels of time. One can't simply just live in the now and that eternal moment at all times, for the most part. There are still trains to catch, there's still babies to feed, there's things to do. No matter who you are, you have to attend to the physical body, to that, most basic matters of times and needs. And to be able to balance, that transcendental spiritual time and experience with the qualitative temporal time, it can be a very difficult endeavor. Even many high saints have a hard time, staying in their bodies because of this. Most of us sadhaks or spiritual aspirants, most of us are, completely enmeshed in the material world, and can that in itself can also wreak great havoc within the lower realms if we don't appreciate some of these higher levels of time, higher experiences, higher notions of something beyond our day-to-day existence. And if we don't try to get in touch with them, while we're living, while we're existing, to understand a timeless space and experience that through meditation, through kumbhaka or pranayama, when that breath stops and you can experience time stopping essentially as the mind stops and all that, and you go back to that center, that soul center of the sun. Looking a little deeper at these various levels of time once again, and applying this to some of the philosophy and ideas that we've covered before, we can see that there's various ways this can work out. For our look here, we can see time as Brahma, who is really the cause and the creator of the world. And without time as the starting point, nothing can really evolve or move or exist or change, So in essence, we can equate Brahma, the creator, with time itself. They're inseparable from each other, essentially. And when we tie this in, that moment of creation, of existence, and when we tie that in with the Sankhya philosophy, with that understanding of Purusha and Prakriti, we can see some of these concerns come up in what's called the Pancharatra philosophy, which also include kala or time as an element that impels the universe into being. It's the element, this time element, this Brahma, this creative impulse. It's what really separates as well as unites the Purusha and Prakriti in the creation as well as the dissolution. So time is really that essential mover to create the entire universe, to manifest. And without it, nothing would be here. The Prakriti would not manifest without that subtle movement of time here, at that most subtle level. That's at that transcendental level, which we covered before. So these are this is a relatively deep concept that needs some meditation on, but just getting the basic idea for now is important. And it's also at this highest level, this is where, once again, transcendental time exists. And it's where, sattva, rajas, and tamas, they coexist in the mula prakriti, in the Sankhya scheme, which is why, I need you to get grounded in that scheme, because it comes up time and time again. It's also for this reason, as I spoke before, why when our breath stops, or the kumbhaka in yoga, we can start to access that timeless states, because we're suspending that motion of creation, which helps us merge back into beyond that transcendental state into that, into yoga, what yoga really is, not just the practices of yoga, but true yoga, true union. Now, below this transcendental time, which is, a very extremely subtle thing, hence, the term transcendental is what's called, can be considered subtle time. And so this is where things are just constantly changing and ever morphing and moving. And, it's where the mind is existing, essentially, and can be experienced within sleep. And you can see this at play within dream logic, where things can happen so many different ways, so many different manners. Much later in these courses, I hope we'll have a unit on dreaming and working with dreams. But for now, everyone's had at least some experience with dreams and dream logic. So it's here that we can see a connection to the mind, which is also can connect to the nakshatra mandala within Jyotish. It's this nakshatra mandala, which is this mandala is really created by the movement of the moon. And as we know, the moon is associated with the mind, and it has strong associations with these concerns in Jyotish. And it's these moon-based timing systems which show qualities that arise within a person's life at various times, and the qualities of the mind and moon and what's coming from the world. So it's really this subtle aspect of time governed over by the mind that also determines the abilities and inclinations of the intellect, etc. And these can also be seen within the deeper level of D charts, such as the D9, D60, and so forth. So this is at that subtle level of time, and there's different dasha systems, and so a lot of them are based on the moon. The most important is Vimshotri, which we will look at here, but there are others as well. But they show various qualities, so it's important to have these schemes also in place, so we know when we're looking at different things within these systems what they're really showing us is. Now, the next level we can come to, once again, below this subtle level of time, is the grosser time, which can be seen as being manifested within the zodiac, within the signs, which is, below the nakshatra mandala, which you should hopefully be familiar with from the previous module, just a little bit. And this is really the wheel of creation, or samsara, if you will. And it's at this grossest level of time that, we're all readily familiar with, in which the Rashi and, the fruits of the houses, the bhavas, are given out to us in our existence, what's happening in our gross day-to-day life. And it's really the sun that creates the sign with his movements, as seen from the earth, that is, and where whole timing systems also come in, which are different from the moon and the nakshatra kind of timing systems. And there's whole timing system based on signs, and these timing systems show actual circumstances that our lives are bringing to us, as opposed to the more qualitative kind of subtle moon-orientated things that are seen in the nakshatra timing systems. And so by using these last two levels of time within their predictions, astrologers can really get a good deal of what's manifesting in a person's life. While it's that transcendental time where all the spiritual paths are really looking to take us and to help us get out of these lower kind of cyclical and changing aspects of time. And the astrology can help us to maneuver these kind of ever-changing patterns of cyclical time, so that we can also always have that kind of notion and get a better tap into the transcendent time, so that the patterns don't wreak so much havoc within our practices. And so that's a rough overview of those different levels of time, how they connect to this knowledge, and it'll help you to appreciate what you're looking at in the future. Now, with this basic understanding of the levels of time, we can see how this is put into play within various timing cycles on a little more technical and a little more practical level, past the previous information, a little more philosophical, but now we'll start to apply it a little more. Now, the largest of these comes from a branch of knowledge known as Brahma Vidya, which is that of Brahma, or the creator, and how the universe is basically created and evolves within time. And as we noted before, without Brahma, without time, nothing would be created. So we need to start here to understand these bigger constructs of time. And it's here that we find the creation and dissolution of the universe comes into various cycles, and the ancients actually tried to time the whole creation, if you will, as seen in the ancient Vedic texts. And once again, these time spans are very in line with modern physics. They're not exact, but then again, modern physics, they're just as much speculative. But it's important to note that, it's the time scales of both the ancients as well as modern physics that are showing an appreciation for the larger constructs. And so there is a lot of overlap there. Now, to begin with, we see that the creation of the universe is seen to exist within a lifetime of Brahma, who's thought to be aged at 100 years. However, this 100 years of Brahma is really untold number of human years. As we're going to see, since time moves much, much, much slower, the higher we go in the lokas, or the subtle divisions and the higher realms of existence, according to these theories. The interesting thing in this cosmogony is that not only are there multiple lives of Brahma, but there are also multiple universes as well. There's only one universe, so there's the great depth there that goes into what's going on. But for our purposes here, we're just going to start with the well-known Yuga theories in order to understand the scope of this time span. And this is really, once again, crucial information for anybody claiming to be practicing yoga, or these spiritual paths from India, as they really form an outlook that's really intimately linked to the various philosophical underpinnings of these systems, and really how we approach and understand our practices in this era. So it's something that we need to contemplate and get our head around, and see where we stand on it, to help us inform our own philosophy and vision, and if it really connects with reality, or if we're doing spiritual bypassing or hopeful endeavors, or any number of things. So it's important to reflect on these things, whether you agree or get into what I'm presenting here or not. It's an important question for you to look into. So to look at the yugas, as noted in previous lessons, there's 4 yugas, which are primarily used to understand our spiritual existence within the universe, within these ages, with the timings given as follows. Now, this chart is couched in divine or Daiva years, which I've shown here with, the Sat Yuga, which is that most spiritual age, with a length of 4,800 divine years. That's not human years there, with an entry-exit point of 400. And this gets translated into human years, and so on and so forth. So you can see that as each age goes, they get shorter and shorter as spirituality declines, as you should be familiar with from the previous lessons. Now, this scheme of Daiva years is well known within all the ancient Shastra, in which a year of the sun in what's called Bhuvaloka. Hopefully you listened to Sanjay's lectures on astrology, so you should be at least familiar with, the earth plane, the Bhuva and Svarga lokas. But, essentially in the movement of the solar system, a year at the level of the sun is equal to, is considered to be 360 years here on earth. Or in other words, one day of the sun god is really 1 year of man. And so it's that calculation which can be used to extrapolate, so that basically, as you can see here on this chart, when humans experience 432,000 years this in the Bhuvaloka, in that higher realm of existence, the divine years, that sun god only experiences 1,200 years, as noted on the slide. So such knowledge, such as this, was detailed in texts such as the Vishnu Purana. If you want to look that up or find a copy, it was in Book 1, Chapter 3. And this was written by sage Parashara himself. This is, the same Parasara who wrote the Brihat Hora Shastra, which forms the entire science, entire knowledge of Jyotish. So even here, he explicitly lays out the divine years, how to calculate the yugas and all the various timing cycles within the Vishnu Purana. A lot of people are not even aware of this Purana or Parashara's work, or don't study it in depth, but from a traditional Jyotish standpoint, this is really a crucial text to be familiar with, as it gives you insight into how Parashara thinks, some more of his background understanding and other teachings. So it's worth looking into, or at least understanding and appreciating where the timing systems are coming from. And, this notion of divine years as well is evident in many other Puranas, as well as various stories, and sort of the, various levels of time. For example, there's a nakshatra, Rohini, and there's, a story in the Puranas where we understand some of the functionings of Rohini, where Rohini is this female who's a divine figure whose father went to ask Brahma for a husband. So in order to go to Brahma, though, you have to go to these higher planes of existence where time moves slower. And so when he went to go ask Brahma for a husband, he had to wait for Brahma because Brahma was, busy doing something. However, the father forgot how, that time was moving slower in Brahma's loka. And by the time he got to talk to Brahma, so much time on earth had passed. I believe the story goes he was originally in in the Satya Yuga, but by the time he talked to Brahma and ready to go back to Earth for her husband, it was already the Kali Yuga, and there was no suitable grooms for her, save for Krishna's brother, I believe, who she ended up getting married to. But that's the basic gist of the story. Some of the small details might be a little confused there, but that's the basic idea. But what's important here is you see that throughout the literatures there is a notion of time moving at different levels, at different realms of existence, that needs to be taken into consideration when we're calculating anything, especially down to how we're experiencing it on the earth plane here. And there's also other detailed astronomical texts such as Surya Siddhanta, or the Manu's Laws, which is another core Vedic text that gives, the Daiva, the divine years. And so it's very clear from reading these texts that, we should be calculating and translating these yugas into human years from the divine years. So to deny this fact is basically to just go against all Vedic scriptural knowledge on a lot of levels. And so when we look to Sri Yukteswar, he was of the opinion, and he refuted this calculation of divine years. He thought that the ancients had it wrong, that it was lost, and that we should be merely calculating the years straightly as given in the text, so that if the text said 4,800 divine years, that meant a human year as well, so that his timing systems were extremely shortened due to this, because he's not taking into the vast extent of how much slower time moves at higher realms of existence. And so with this, he calculated the Yuga cycle to 24,000 years instead of what we've given in the previous slide, and he linked this up to the time of the precession of the equinoxes, which does roughly line up. I think that's around 25,000 years or so, 26,000 closer for the precession. However, he also referenced that same 24,000 years as the same time that the solar system revolves around the galactic center, or what's called the Vishnu Nabi. That's also stated in the ancient texts. And, he linked this to all sorts of esoteric ideas of spirituality. However, this movement of the sun around Vishnu Nabi, around the center of the galaxy, actually takes 230 million years, which is closer to another timing called the Manvantara, which we'll talk about. So he obviously had his calculations a bit off, definitely in that respect, and he's obviously going against the Vedic literature on a lot of levels in his calculation of the entire Yuga cycle of 24,000 human years. So even if you do agree that, he was correct in discounting all the ancient Vedic Shastra and sages such as Parashara and everyone else under the sun, you can also see that for a point fact, just looking at his straight astronomical calculations of our movement around the center of the galaxy was just completely misinformed. So there's definitely some miscalculation in there, and then depending on your viewpoint of Vedic Shastra and the ancients, you can debate there. This course will take the traditional Vedic views and the traditional Vedic text with great respect to the rishis who created those things. But once again, that's up to you. I know a lot of people who are very this is really challenging for a lot of people, especially those steeped in these teachings, and could wonder how someone as great as Yukteswar, and I don't mean to say he was not a learned man and perhaps a great guru. I never met him, don't know too much about him, but I'm not trying to discredit his spiritual teachings or, Yogananda's great influence on the world. And, I've been touched. I've had my own personal experiences with Yogananda and his teachings as well. So, there's definitely some beautiful things going on there. But, this is just reporting facts. And you can research all this on your own if you want in depth, but it's all there. But it's also interesting to note that his great disciple Yogananda and their teachings really show a reinterpretation of Vedic knowledge. And they have numerous disciples in this day and age. And if we do take the traditional stance of Kali Yuga, what's taught is that true Vedic knowledge is harder and harder to uncover. And to really sink into the depth of it, the more and more as Kali Yuga progresses. And it even looking at Yogananda's teachings himself too, he's not a straight Vedic teacher. They infuse elements of Christianity and other teachings. And once again, beautiful teachings. But properly speaking, these would be Yogananda's teachings would, along with Yukteswar's views, would be considered Neo-Vedic. So they're definitely their own brand of spirituality, born out of Vedic heritage and Vedic understanding, but that they're definitely their own teaching that is apart and separate from understanding the whole of Vedic knowledge. So just some things to consider and keep in mind. And we'll also be looking at, sub-cycles of the Yugas shortly, and how this plays into all of this. But it's important, really important to note these as these ideas of the Yuga cycles are very rampant in modern yoga circles, as well as modern astrologers, and even many New Age circles, such as Rudolf Steiner, whose adherents, the Waldorf school movement, and Steiner had his hand in so many things. But anyways, his adherents too use Yukteswar as their reference for their timing within the Vedic system, without any deeper research on their own. And so many of in many New Age movements, they really use these ideas as a hopeful means for man being in some kind of enlightened age or on an upward swing. Which was much in vogue during the 1800s when, industrialization and technological advances were coming up. The world was kind of seen to be coming together. And, even nowadays we see these moves towards yoga and temples being built. And, all these things are definitely happening, but they're a shorter term cycle, which we'll look at how to divide the yugas and why that's coming up. And so, but they're always couched within that larger trend of the Kali Yuga. And, we can't deny that, we're basically at a cross currents of destruction of our planet. And this current, spiritual trust is merely, it's a balancing act, if you will, to what's essentially very, very problematic and destructive forces. We're still not at, most of us are hardly spiritual, myself included, in this day and age. And we have to respect that and realize that on some level. If not, there's a lot of spiritual bypassing and overly hopeful thoughts of what we're doing with our lives, I believe, which we'll get into and which we can discuss if, you have another viewpoint. But understanding the crust of the yugas is also vitally crucial, because it helps us step in those, truly universal perspective of the time we live in. If we don't want to, keep further deluding ourselves within this Kali Yuga. And I'm quite critical, if you haven't noticed yet, if you've made it this far within our courses, but, I am really critical of many things going on in yoga, Ayurveda, all this stuff. And most people either think I sound crazy, I'm mean, I don't know what I'm talking about. But, I'm just trying to stay as close as I can to Vedic knowledge, or at least admitting what I don't know, and how these understandings and misconceptions and knowing this, that what Kali Yuga is bringing will shed a lot of light on how what's really the majority, the vast majority of modern spiritual speakers are becoming deluded. And, I've gone through this myself, and I'm still working hard to uncover what I can in this era. And it's not easy, because there's a depth to all this stuff that most people have no clue about. Nonetheless, just to move away from that point, we can see in the Vedas and its truth, they've largely been lost these days. And despite yoga being on every street corner in almost the entire world, and we got this International Yoga Day now, there's really no sign that people are actually practicing yoga per what scriptures are stating. The real even calling it yoga. Their practice is to yoga. Even the yoga is really union. If you're not in union, you're not doing yoga. You can't do yoga. Even that whole concept is being twisted to where it's just being lost. Most modern yoga has really devolved into either just basically exercise or physical therapy, couched in spiritual philosophy. We see endless guru scandals, even with some of the largest schools that have the biggest influence over the most people. And now the modern Ayurveda craze, it's teaching knowledge that really has nothing to do with traditional Ayurveda, and a lot of it's being fueled by business, and I could rant on and on and on. But I'm just going to say that really true spiritual teachers, true practices are really in the minority these days. You have to be careful. And any of this true knowledge, it takes time, it takes dedication, it takes practice. It doesn't come easy. It does not come easy. A lot of it can work like a drug to placate ourselves, to help us think better of ourselves or our viewpoint on the world. But to really undermine our deep-rooted habits and karma and existence is always hard work, and it will create something in you. So with that said, moving on past these larger cycles, also, once again, when you look at these sub-cycles, you can really see what shifts are occurring within the Kali Yuga, giving us a broader perspective. However, we always have to remind that even though there is an upswing in interest in spirituality and temples, it's always subsumed under that Kali Yuga. And, that deep spiritual potential is largely untapped. Now, to gain an appreciation past my own view or opinions, but we can look into the ancient texts and descriptions to see some of the predictions for what will unfold within the Kali Yuga. And it gives us even more insight and understanding why things are this way. Now, even though if you really heed this understanding or take it seriously enough, due to just the gross ignorance in this age, I'm not professing one-upmanship on any of this or spiritual superiority, but I'm just pointing out what is in these texts, what they're saying, and from my vantage point, they look very accurate. Perhaps one of the most poignant predictions and descriptions of the Kali Yuga comes from the Srimad Bhagavatam, which lays out, that's probably one of the deepest texts to understand the full Vedic cosmogony and, the universe, different levels of existence. There's just so much in that text, which is worth your time to read if you are a serious yoga practitioner who wants to understand, how the Vedic systems are really presented. But here, I've put up some quotes just to read you some. As the age of Kali progresses, all good qualities of men diminish and all impure qualities increase. Atheistic systems of so-called religion become predominant, replacing the codes of Vedic law. The kings become just like highway bandits, the people in general become dedicated to low occupations, and all the social classes become just like Shudras. All cows become like goats, all spiritual hermitages become like materialistic homes, and family ties extend no further than the immediate relationship of marriage. Just unpack that a little bit. I could pick out any number one of these things. One of the most prominent, kings become like highway bandits. It doesn't take anything looking past the front page of a newspaper to see how corrupt politics, presidents, dictators has become in this day and age. Has become, essentially puppets to materialism, to money. Whereas, according to Vedic law, Vedic dharma, and in, more spiritually enlightened times, kings would take care of their subjects and try to follow the laws of dharma. They had a role to play and they took that seriously. And nowadays, we're just like cogs in a machine. That line where people take the low occupations and people become like Shudras, which is these lower case. We're all like Shudras these days. If you think of that, the 99%, where 1% of the population owns all the wealth, and 99% don't have it, that shows how we have all become what is essentially lower class in many respects. slaves to the system of money, and having to answer to it. All of us alike, even, it's a constant trope nowadays with, yoga teachers needing to, make a living and do this and that to, and justify it to themselves in so many ways. We're not that spiritual. This is what the understanding of the Kali Yuga comes up. It's very hard to live a pure spiritual existence. And this isn't to look down upon it. It's also said that, the greatest gains can be made in Kali Yuga if you take up a sincere, devoted spiritual practice. But to find that pure, dedicated spiritual practice can be a tricky thing, because the room for delusion is great at this time as well. So nonetheless, that's another story. Another thing we can pick out here too in this quote: spiritual hermitages become like materialistic homes. Once again, what I just commented on with, look at the yoga studio craze, where yoga is just a commodity to be sold, even for people who think they're serious yogis, or, have real yoga, or are teaching this or that. Family ties extend no further than relationship and marriage. Oftentimes nowadays, the whole marital system is breaking down with the divorce rate nowadays, and who gets along with their in-laws anymore? It's all, that's a common trope in this day and age, is how grating a family can be. And even India now, which had a very strong traditional familial approach, and still much more so than the West, that's, as westernization comes more and more to India now too, that's and other traditional cultures, not just India, but that's our point of reference here. Even that's breaking down more and more. So you can see these concerns coming up. That's clearly outlined here as signs of the Kali Yuga. Another poignant one is, Kali Yuga, wealth alone will be considered the sign of a man's good birth. Proper behavior and fine qualities, and law and justice will be applied only on the basis of one's power. I don't think I need to unpack that much more. Men and women will live together merely because of superficial attraction, and success in business will depend upon deceit. Womanliness and manliness will be judged according to one's expertise in sex, and a man will be known as a brahmana just by his wearing a thread. Another poignant quote, most relationships either start or caused by, that sexual means in this day and age, and it's glorified. Something such as an arranged marriage in India that has traditionally been done, oftentimes, with Jyotish charts and deeper understanding as to how it should be done, is looked at as backwards, as somehow very limiting, when there's actual studies shown that arranged marriages actually are happier and bear out more fruit in the long run. So there's a lot to be looked at there. One's womanliness or manliness judged according to expertise in sex. Look at any magazine rack. Oh geez, if any article comes up on, some of these yoga sites like Elephant Journal, or even, I made a very short video on Ayurveda and sex, and that, got a lot more views than some of my other videos, more quickly at least. Sex is just, it's so prominent these days. These quotes, I don't have to even explain them or comment on them too much. But, if you're interested, they're there. But all these signs, I don't think it's just my interpretation, but it's fairly clear, I believe, when we look at the text, what the Kali Yuga endows for what's going to happen. I think that this isn't enough to pique your interest in the Srimad Bhagavatam, or the idea that we are in the Kali Yuga. I would encourage you to contact me. I'd be interested to hear your views. Maybe I am missing something in all of this. But I do ask you to take these ideas seriously, because I think there's a lot there to look at. The text, these Kali Yuga predictions, also state how life will actually slowly diminish. People will flee to the forest to live off the land, and life expectancy will actually go down to 50 years. And this is an interesting to note, as well as if we look at numerous ancient texts, Kama Sutra, Ayurveda, even Jyotish timing cycles, max life was seen as around 120 years. So life expectancy is often around 100 to 120 years in a lot of these ancient texts, despite many modern scientists claim that life expectancy was way lower in the past. And, once again, trying to buffer this idea that advances in civilization have somehow increased life expectancy, which is just really not the case if you study this culture and what's taught, and which has really been systematically suppressed by invaders, those in power, the British, the Mughals, the mercurial classes, these due to either own blind ignorance or adherence, strict adherence to kind of a linear trajectory of knowledge and life, which is finally kind of being challenged in this day and age. But I assure you, the majority of people interested in spirituality and the like on a deeper level, we're still in the minority, and I think we can tend to get blindsided by that quite often. So that's a basic look, a basic introduction to the various levels of the timing cycles and of the Yuga theory and the ideas implicit in that. Just get familiar with this slightly, and in the next talk we're going to look at the more sub-cycles and how you can take the yugas and divide them into smaller periods, as well as what that can teach us. So I hope this has been helpful, useful. If you have any questions, please get in touch.